In a quiet church fellowship hall in Shreveport, Louisiana, an event unfolded that would leave a lasting impact on everyone present. It was supposed to be a typical town hall gathering, an evening where former President Donald Trump would address locals about political issues, national policies, and the future of America. But amidst the usual chatter and political discussion, something extraordinary happened. An 8-year-old girl named Lily, dressed in her best Sunday clothes and clutching a worn Bible passed down from her late grandmother, stood out in the crowd. Her presence, though small in stature, carried a profound sense of purpose. With a heart full of courage and sincerity, she asked a question that silenced the entire room. "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" That simple, heartfelt question didn't just shift the mood. It transformed the entire evening into a deeply emotional and spiritual experience. What followed was not a political speech, but a moment of raw honesty, reflection, and shared humanity between a child and a man known for his tough exterior. Lily was not like most children her age. Quiet and thoughtful, she had spent weeks preparing a single question that weighed heavily on her young heart. She wasn't just curious. She was searching for something deeper. The worn Bible she held close to her chest had belonged to her late grandmother, a woman whose faith had shaped much of Lily's early understanding of God. Its faded cover and frayed pages symbolized more than age. They represented memories, love, and unspoken prayers passed down through generations. Before arriving at the event, Lily's mother had leaned down and whispered to her, "You can ask him, but only if you're brave enough, and only if you truly mean it." Lily had nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. During recess at school, she had written and rewritten the question in her notebook. At night, she would whisper it to herself in the dark, unsure of whether she'd ever have the courage to say it aloud. She was only 8, but her question wasn't childish. It came from a place of genuine faith and longing. In a room filled with adults talking about politics and national issues, Lily represented something different. Innocence, purity, and a yearning to understand something far bigger than herself. And as the evening wore on, she waited patiently, Bible in hand, heart full of hope, for the moment when she could finally ask. As the evening progressed, Donald Trump spoke confidently about his usual topics: policy, leadership, and the state of the nation. The audience listened respectfully, occasionally clapping or nodding, but the energy was far more subdued than at one of his rallies. Meanwhile, Lily sat quietly near the back, gripping her grandmother's Bible a little tighter with every passing minute. Then the floor opened for questions. One by one, adults stood up to ask about taxes, local concerns, and even complimented Trump on his trademark red tie. Lily hesitated, shrinking into her seat, her small hands trembling. But her mother gently nudged her forward, and Lily knew her time had come. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the microphone. The room, once buzzing with chatter, gradually fell silent as people noticed her. A small girl with an oversized Bible, walking with quiet determination. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who was she? What could she possibly ask? When it was finally her turn, Trump looked down at her. His expression, usually bold and commanding, softened. "And what's your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle. Lily took a deep breath. Her voice trembled, but her spirit did not. "Mr. Trump," she asked, "what does God mean to you?" A hush fell over the room. No cameras clicked, no one shifted in their seat. It was as if the entire world had paused to hear his answer. In that instant, Lily's question cut through the noise of politics and power. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't for show, it was real, and everyone felt it. For a man known for his quick wit, unwavering confidence, and rapid-fire answers, Donald Trump was unexpectedly silent. The question had clearly caught him off guard, not because it was inappropriate or challenging, but because it was real. It stripped away the layers of politics and performance, leaving only a deeply human moment. He looked at Lily, at the Bible she held so tightly, at the sincerity in her eyes, and something in his demeanor shifted. The bravado that usually defined him seemed to melt, replaced by a quiet, almost vulnerable presence. The room remained absolutely still. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something profound was about to happen. Trump finally took a breath and spoke, his voice noticeably softer than usual. "You know," he said, "I've been asked a lot of questions in my life, hard ones, but this might be the most important." He glanced again at the Bible in her hands. His tone was no longer that of a politician on stage, but of a man reflecting on something deeply personal. "God, to me," he continued, "is strength. He's guidance. He's the reason I've been able to get back up every time I've been knocked down." He admitted to mistakes, losses, and moments of despair, rare honesty from someone who usually projected invincibility. "I've faced times where I didn't know if I could go on," he confessed, "but in those moments I turned to God, and He was there." It wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was raw, emotional, honest, the kind of answer that doesn't come from a teleprompter, but from the heart. And in that moment, Lily's question had opened a door inside him, one he hadn't opened in public for a very long time. As the room remained silent, something in Trump's voice deepened. He wasn't merely speaking as a public figure, but as a man who had lived through hardship and loss. He shifted his focus back to Lily, his tone softer, more reflective. "I've made mistakes," he continued. "I've lost people I love. There have been times when I didn't know if I could keep going." His gaze softened as he paused, as if reflecting on the pain of those experiences. "But I've learned that in those moments, faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about believing that there's something greater, something beyond what we can see." Trump's words were not the confident rhetoric of a leader who commands rooms with forceful speeches. They were the words of someone who had been tested by life, who had faced adversity, and who had found solace in faith. He spoke of God not as a distant force, but as a constant companion, a source of strength during the darkest of times. With a deep breath, he pulled out a small worn card from his suit pocket. "This," he said, holding it up briefly for the room to see, "was given to me a long time ago. It's a prayer my mother used to say. I carry it with me always." The card, small and simple, represented a connection to something much larger than himself, a reminder of the faith that had been instilled in him from childhood. He glanced at Lily once more, his eyes filled with something almost paternal. "Never stop asking questions like that," he told her. "Never stop seeking Him." At that moment, the room felt different. It wasn't just the quiet power of Trump's words, but the vulnerability he had allowed to shine through. The crowd, once filled with the usual applause for a political speech, now responded with something deeper, something more intimate. Slowly, a round of applause began to spread through the room. It wasn't the usual, thunderous applause Trump was accustomed to. This was quieter, more personal. It was a recognition not just of the speaker, but of the sincerity and raw emotion that had been shared. As Trump spoke, Lily's grip on her grandmother's Bible loosened slightly. The words she had been waiting to hear, the words she had hoped would answer her question, had come. But they were more than just words. They were an emotional release. For Lily, a wave of emotion began to swell in her chest. She hadn't expected the answer to move her so deeply, but it did. The quiet tears that began to form in her eyes were a silent testament to the power of the moment. Her shoulders trembled, and a single tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but one of recognition, of a heart that had been searching for something deeper than politics, something beyond the everyday struggles. It was a moment of connection, not just with Trump, but with the larger force he had described. Lily's innocent question had unlocked a vulnerability in him that mirrored her own. The audience, sensing the shift in the room, fell into a collective hush. No one dared to break the silence. Even the faint sound of chairs creaking or the shuffle of feet seemed to vanish. Everyone was caught in the weight of the moment, captivated by the raw emotion that had unfolded between the little girl and the former president. Lily's mother leaned over instinctively, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's back. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered softly. "You've asked a beautiful question." Lily nodded, still holding her grandmother's Bible to her chest. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of wonder and understanding beyond her years. The entire room, moved by her sincerity and the exchange that had just occurred, shared in that collective emotion. For many, it was a moment that transcended the political or the ordinary. It was a reminder of faith, of human vulnerability, and of the power of asking the right questions. As the tears continued to well up in her eyes, something changed in Lily. She wasn't just a little girl asking a question anymore. She had become a symbol of the courage to seek truth, to seek faith, and to ask the questions that really matter. And as the applause began, she stood there, her heart full, her faith affirmed in a way she would never forget. As the room remained captivated by the moment, Trump's voice shifted again. He seemed to gather himself, as if the weight of his own reflections had deepened even further. He wasn't merely speaking of faith in abstract terms anymore. He was speaking from the heart about personal loss and the struggles that had shaped him. "When I was younger," he began, "I had a brother named Fred. He was one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever known. He had a light about him that I couldn't fully understand at the time." Trump's gaze softened, a slight tremor in his voice. "But Fred had his demons, and no matter how much my family and I tried to help him, it wasn't enough." A subtle shift in the room occurred. The audience, who had only seen Trump as a larger-than-life figure, now saw him in a new light, vulnerable, raw, and human. For a moment he paused, his eyes briefly glancing downward, lost in the weight of his memories. "When Fred passed away," Trump continued, his voice faltering slightly, "I was angry. I was angry at him. I was angry at myself. And I was angry at God. I couldn't understand why someone so good, someone with so much potential, had to leave this world so soon." His voice caught in his throat as he relived the painful moment. The room remained still, everyone absorbing his words. Trump's usual strength and self-assurance seemed to fade away as he spoke about the loss of his brother, something far more personal than any political speech. The audience could feel his pain, his grief, and the struggle he faced with his faith in the face of tragedy. "I didn't talk about it," he admitted. "I didn't pray. I didn't want to think about God because if he was really there, why had he let this happen?" For the first time that evening, Trump's tone was not one of leadership or defiance. It was one of quiet honesty. He had openly questioned his faith, something few people, especially public figures, would ever admit. But then, as he spoke further, his voice steadied. "Over the years, I started to realize something," he said. "Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting that even when things don't make sense, even when life feels unfair, there's still a purpose, there's still a reason, a path forward." The crowd listened, the gravity of Trump's words settling in the air. He was no longer the confident, quick-witted leader. He was a man reflecting on the deep pain and loss he had endured, offering a sense of healing not just for himself, but for everyone present. As Trump finished his story about the loss of his brother, the entire room seemed to shift. What had begun as a standard political town hall, full of expected rhetoric and public speeches, had transformed into something far more profound. The crowd, which had been a mixture of people from different walks of life, now shared something deeper, a moment of vulnerability and human connection. Trump's words had created a sense of intimacy in the room, a space where people could reflect on their own lives, losses, and faith. It was no longer about politics or policies. It was about something more personal, the trials and triumphs of the human spirit. The energy in the room had noticeably changed. People who had initially come to hear about politics and national affairs were now drawn into a collective reflection on their own beliefs and struggles. Trump, known for his bold and often confrontational style, had become a source of reflection rather than just a figure of authority. For the audience, especially the older members of the crowd, there was a sense of recognition in Trump's words. Many of them, having lived through decades of challenges and changes, could relate to the pain he expressed. They knew all too well the feeling of loss, of moments when life felt uncertain, and of the quiet strength that faith could provide. In that moment, Trump was no longer just a politician. He was a man who had been through life's trials, just like everyone else in the room. His vulnerability had allowed the audience to see beyond the persona of the former president and connect with him on a deeply human level. The applause that followed was not the usual loud, rapid clapping that accompanied his speeches. This applause was slower, softer, a recognition of the raw emotion that had been shared. It was a standing ovation not for the man on stage, but for the truth that had been revealed, for the courage it took to open up, and for the universal message about faith and perseverance. As the standing ovation slowly faded, the room remained filled with a deep, reflective silence. It was as though everyone present had been moved beyond the political discourse of the evening and had entered into a shared space of personal connection. It wasn't just Trump's story that had touched them. It was the collective experience of being in that room, vulnerable and open to something greater than themselves. Then, in the midst of this quiet, an older woman raised her hand from the back of the room. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I lost my husband last year," she began, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've been angry at God ever since. I feel like I've lost my faith entirely." A hush fell over the room again. The weight of her grief hung in the air, heavy and palpable. People around her shifted uncomfortably, feeling the depth of her pain, yet no one interrupted. Everyone understood that this moment of shared vulnerability had transformed the space from a political meeting to a sanctuary of sorts, a place for healing. Trump, who had just shared his own moment of deep loss and questioning, looked at the woman with a gentle expression. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted, his voice now soft and measured. "But I do know this. God doesn't leave us, even when we feel like we've left Him. Sometimes faith isn't about feeling it every day. It's about holding on, even when we're not sure why. The woman nodded slowly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Maybe that's what I needed to hear," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet relief. The audience, sensing her moment of catharsis, gave a soft nod of agreement. It was as if they were all holding their breath, witnessing a moment of healing unfold before them. Trump's words, though simple, carried the weight of his own journey of grief and recovery. And in this shared space, the room began to feel lighter, the tension of personal struggles giving way to a sense of collective understanding and compassion. Soon after, another voice broke the silence. This time, it was Lily, the little girl who had asked the question that had set this entire moment in motion. "My grandma used to say that faith is like planting seeds," she said clearly, her voice strong and steady despite her small frame. "She said you don't always see them grow right away, but you have to believe they will." Lily's simple but profound statement resonated deeply with the audience. Trump, moved by her words, smiled warmly. "Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman," he said. "And she's right. Faith is a seed. It doesn't always sprout right away, but that doesn't mean it's not growing, just beneath the surface." The audience, who had been so caught up in their own thoughts and reflections, nodded collectively. There was a sense of comfort in the idea that faith, like a seed, could take time to grow, and that it was okay not to have all the answers immediately. Sometimes, the most important thing was to hold on and trust that the process was unfolding as it should. The conversation continued, shifting from Trump's personal reflections to a more open dialogue, where others began to share their own stories of faith, doubt, and hope. What had started as a political event had blossomed into a powerful, communal moment of introspection and healing. As the evening drew to a close, the atmosphere in the room felt completely transformed. What had started as a routine political town hall had evolved into a deeply personal and spiritual gathering, where everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, was invited to reflect on their own faith, struggles, and the importance of human connection. For Lily, the little girl who had started it all, the night would stay with her forever. She had asked a question not out of curiosity, but from a place of sincere longing to understand something greater than herself. In return, she had received not just an answer from Donald Trump, but a moment of profound connection with him and with the entire room. The lesson, however, was far greater than just the exchange between a child and a public figure. It was a reminder that faith, hope, and healing don't always come in grand gestures or well-crafted speeches. Sometimes they come in the simplest of moments, in a question asked with genuine sincerity, in an answer spoken from the heart, and in the shared vulnerability that allows people to connect beyond their differences. The audience left that evening with a renewed sense of purpose. For some, it was a rekindling of their faith. For others, it was a reminder of the importance of asking tough questions and being open to the answers that might follow. Many found solace in Trump's reflections on his own journey of grief and faith. They saw in him not just a political leader, but a fellow human being struggling, questioning, and ultimately seeking meaning in the face of life's challenges. For those in the room, the most important lesson wasn't about politics or policies, or even the role of faith in public life. It was about the power of vulnerability and the importance of being true to oneself. Faith, Trump had said, isn't about having all the answers. It's about believing that even when you don't see the whole picture, there's a purpose. That night, people were reminded that they didn't have to have all the answers either. As the evening came to a close, there was a quiet reverence that lingered in the room. The usual political discussions had been set aside, replaced by something far more profound, a shared understanding of the power of faith, the vulnerability of the human experience, and the need for connection in times of doubt. Trump's closing words resonated with everyone in the room, but they were particularly meaningful for Lily, who had asked the question that started it all. "Faith isn't just something we talk about," Trump had said. "It's something we live, and when we live it, it spreads." The room was filled with a collective sense of realization that faith, whether in God, in each other, or in themselves, wasn't a matter of certainty or perfection. It was about the willingness to keep going, even when the answers aren't clear, and the courage to share that journey with others. Lily, her heart full and her faith stronger than ever, stood with her grandmother's Bible still clutched tightly in her hands. The night had become more than just an event. It had become a reminder for all those present that the simplest questions often lead to the most meaningful answers. And, as Trump had said, never stop asking questions like that, never stop seeking him. For everyone who was there that night, it was clear. Faith was not something to be understood in one moment or explained in a single conversation. It was a continual search, a journey that could be shared, explored, and strengthened through moments of honesty, vulnerability, and connection. As the crowd slowly made its way out of the room, there was a sense of quiet solidarity, a knowing that something significant had happened. It was a reminder that in a world full of distractions and challenges, the most important thing was to stay true to what really mattered: the values we live by, the faith we hold, and the connections we make along the way. And for Lily, the little girl who had asked that simple yet powerful question, that night would stay with her forever, a moment of spiritual awakening, where her courage had sparked something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. As the event came to a close and the audience slowly filtered out of the room, a sense of calm and reflection remained in the air. What had started as a typical political town hall had transformed into a deeply personal and emotional experience. It was no longer about policies, speeches, or political strategies. It had become a shared moment of introspection and humanity. For Lily, the 8-year-old girl who had asked the question that had shifted the entire tone of the evening, the night was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She had asked a question from a place of pure faith and curiosity, and in return had received not just an answer, but a profound lesson about the importance of faith, perseverance, and the courage to ask the questions that matter. The evening had also left a lasting impact on everyone who had been present. Trump, known for his strong presence and often combative rhetoric, had shown a side of himself that many had never seen before. A vulnerable, reflective man who had faced his own trials and struggles, yet found solace and strength in his faith. His openness had allowed others to do the same, and in sharing his personal story, he had helped to create an environment where others felt safe to share their own. The lessons of the night were clear. Faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting in something greater, even when things don't make sense. It's about living out the values we hold dear, and it's about connection, connecting with others through shared vulnerability and openness. The courage that Lily had shown by asking her question had sparked a moment of deep reflection in everyone in the room, from the former president to the audience members, and it reminded them all of the power of simple, honest inquiry. Faith, after all, is often not about grand gestures or flashy declarations. It's about the quiet moments of searching, asking, and believing in something beyond ourselves. As Lily stood there with her grandmother's Bible clutched tightly in her hands, she had no way of knowing just how much her question would resonate with so many people. But she had asked it anyway, boldly and with a heart full of sincerity. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest questions can lead to the most profound answers, and the smallest voices can bring about the greatest changes.